Welcome to Athletic Skills Podcast, the show where we help sports coaches, S&C coaches and PE teachers learn how they can impact their athletes' movement and physical development in a fun, practical way. I'm your host, Isaac, founder of Athletic Skills, and in today's episode, I chat to James Fitzgerald, who is S&C coach at Derbyshire Cricket Club. So James chats through his S&C journey, first from starting out in Gibraltar, then moving over to the UK to then study, and how he managed to get some placements along the way to now be working in professional sport full time. So James shares his journey and his learnings and how he went about networking, getting some placements, and how he faced failure and challenges along the way. So any S&C coach or sports coach who's listening to this and wants to get into professional sport, this is a great listen on how to manage this industry and this journey along the way, and some great advice to try and help you out on your pathway also. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review if you enjoy the show. Now let's get started. This podcast is brought to you by Brendan Chaplin Business Coaching. Brendan guides coaches and service-based entrepreneurs to deliver their best work, build a 7-figure lifestyle and performance business, and create a life of freedom. I started working with Brendan in September 2023, and it's been a great journey since I started working with him in launching my own business, Athletic Skills. Brendan has been fully invested in me and is a great person to chat with, to share ideas, and has vast knowledge and experiences to share also. The reason I picked to work with Brendan is that he has done it himself in launching businesses and has a similar background to myself in S&C and wants to live a life that you want. If you want to speak to Brendan on how he can help create a life of freedom and guide you on that journey, get in touch with him by one of the methods in the show notes and DM him the word coach, and he will start the conversation. You won't regret it, and there's a good chance it might just change your life too. Hi everyone, welcome to Athletic Skills Podcast. The likes of James Fitzgerald on me. So James is a strength and conditioning coach at Derbyshire Cricket. James, thank you very much for joining.
No, good mate, thank you very much for having me on.
I usually ask about your background, but we're going to chat through your S&C journey. One question I'm going to start with is, why do you love strength and conditioning?
That's a great question. And I look for a few reasons, and then when we get into some parts of the season, probably a bit less so. I'm joking, but I suppose for a couple of reasons. I think the classic one is just to try and help athletes with, yes, their physical stuff and being able to improve their performance and reduce injury risk and all that kind of stuff. But I think the more neat side of it is when you get into the season and guys succeed, that fills you with pride, guys getting selected for international stuff, or being, in my case, working with the academy. You see that progression to when they get their professional contract, or guys playing for the second team. That's what I do it for, and seeing those guys succeed is probably the best answer for you.
Yeah, just making an impact on someone's life, even if that player doesn't go on to sport, but you as an S&C coach, give them that tools to have a healthy life and fitness for after cricket as well.
Exactly. I think it's more, I once heard someone say that an S&C coach who's working for another county managed to make the guys really love their going into the gym and doing their S&C. And I think that's how I like to live by, how I work with the lads as well, in terms of making sure that their S&C stuff with me isn't a chore and they're not like dreading it, is that they actually enjoy it as well. And they look forward to coming into the gym is another way I would definitely try and embrace it and try and almost run the way I have my philosophy, if you like.
And that's one role of a strength and conditioning coach that people often forget in terms of that education side and thinking outside of sport, of what sort of a role model that you have as a fitness coach.
I think it's underestimated. I think it's a bit of a cliche, but it's so true, where sometimes it sounds really sad. Sometimes we spend more time with our players and other staff members than we do with our family sometimes when the season comes about as well. You have a lot of time to be able to impact someone in as many ways as you can. And if you can be that person who's not just who's the S&C coach who's making us do horrible things during the winter and then in the summer, and he's telling me that it's going to help me, but I can't really share what it is, compared to that guy who during a gym session, if someone's not feeling quite right, they can almost lean on and be a person rather than just like an S&C and a robot. I think that's the quality that stands out for me in a certain way, where I'm working on being a good person first and good S&C second. I think that's probably something that's a bit undervalued nowadays. I think everyone focuses on getting all these accreditation stuff, and yes, it's important for 100%. but they don't teach you that other side, which you need to gain from getting that experience by actually doing it. I don't think that comes from reading any textbook or any lecture.
So let's look back on your journey. So I was reading a little bit of stuff you sent over. So you grew up in Gibraltar, is that right?
Yes, I did. Yeah, so that's probably where the bizarre accent comes from. People probably hearing a bit of South African, bit of Welsh, something like that. But no, it's fully from Gibraltar. Yeah.
So when in your time in Gibraltar, is that where you started to begin to find strength and conditioning, or you're interested in sports science?
I would say of it came towards like nutrition and stuff like that from growing up. I started off as a personal trainer when I was as early as I could become. So for me, when I started as a personal trainer, I wanted to explore every aspect, and it was the typical journey of either an S&C or a coach, failed athlete first. I'm a cricketer myself, or tried to be anyway, where it just didn't quite work out in the professional game and striving towards it, and almost having that passion to try and help people to not be in the same position that I was. So when it came to that, in Gibraltar, it started to become more professional for sure. And the footballers are definitely becoming a lot more professional. So definitely seeing that side of it definitely probably did motivate me a little bit. And then obviously when I knew that the opportunities over there weren't quite there in strength and conditioning. Made the move over here to try and achieve that. Yeah.
And you mentioned around some sacrifice you have to make as well when you're around time or relationships. How did you find making those sacrifices, and how do you start to manage those as well in those challenging times?
Yeah, it's extremely hard. Apart from you met a couple of older brothers who live over here for sure, but they were quite far away when I came over, when I started in Canterbury. But all the rest of my family are from Gibraltar. I was almost leaving my entire family and coming over to the UK at 18 years old to try, or 17 at the time, to try and not, I wouldn't say it was, being openly honest, it wasn't a dream to be like an S&C at the time, but it was definitely on the horizon for sure. And as I progressed with my education, it definitely became a dream to do that, to work in professional sport. But like I said, leaving the family for, months at a time to be able to come over and study. Loads of people do it for sure, but when it came to a little bit later on spending a bit more time in the UK and a bit less time skipping out on like summers and stuff like that, yeah, it was really challenging, and definitely it probably rubbed some people up the wrong way because it was different. Definitely the tradition in Gibraltar is you go home for your summer leave, and you go home for your Christmas leave, and then you do that cycle again. I saw it as an opportunity more so during the summer months to gain that experience a bit later on. So yeah, that's the best thing that comes with everything in essence. Like I mentioned before, the amount of time that we spend away from our families, and during the summer especially, you've got to be able to sacrifice it. I'm not saying that it's a have to, but it's definitely something that comes with it. But like I said, hopefully you've worked hard on those good bits outweigh those sacrifices. But yeah, it was really hard. I definitely don't regret it, and they're extremely proud, hopefully anyway, they told me. So yeah.
And like you mentioned, the sacrifice you had to make, and there's a lot of developing S&C coaches who are going to university or they're just graduated, and they're going to have to make sacrifices in terms of missing out on social activities or have to work 2 or 3 jobs to try and make a living in getting into strength and conditioning. So have you got any advice for those students who are looking at, will have to make sacrifices and they're trying to balance having that life outside of strength and conditioning as well? I know we'll get into your placements and how you manage those a bit later.
Yes, I definitely did that as well. Iceland, Tesco, definitely did that as well. But it was something that it's one of the things that my mum always said to me, you got to do your have tos before you want tos. And at that time, my want tos were definitely my placements, working at a couple of places that I did, we'll get onto. But for me, I just think it comes down to, I think there's very much 2 types of people when they get into university. I think it's very much someone who learns off being taught by lecturers and by the lecture slides, and then they can transfer it that way, or guys and girls who are from the other side and who learn more from experience and placements and then can visualize what the lecture's saying. And I was very much the latter of those. I felt that I needed to gain that experience. So I don't think it's quite a one size fits all. I think you just need to understand what best suits you. Because I was far from the most academic student, and be completely honest with that. But I definitely worked hard. And I think just being able to know that there is an end point, there is definitely an end point, and there will be at first job. And when you get that first job, you'll have all this emotion come out of it because you know that you don't have to work that extra shift at Tesco or Iceland to forget the rewards for your sacrifices. Yeah, just be really persistent and know that there is an end point. Just keep working each day at a time and go from there. That's probably my best advice.
So you mentioned that you're not the most academic person, or you don't really enjoy sitting down in a lecture room, for example. So you studied your undergrad at Cardiff. So how did you navigate yourself through that degree to make the best use of your time in terms of getting experiences or networking and trying to develop as a strength and conditioning coach or a sports scientist?
Yeah, so obviously I started, like just mentioned, as doing sport and exercise science. So for me, again, wasn't quite 100% sure my path was going to be like at the time, but I knew that doing sport and exercise science was going to give me that opportunity to branch into whatever I wanted to. And I was lucky enough to work. This is one of the ones that I forgot to mention, bless them. They did loads for me. I managed to work with the university cricket team for a couple of years, and it led me to almost putting into practice what I was learning in the lecture hall. They had never had any S&C before that from a quality standard point of view, and being able to organize gym sessions together, runs outside. Some of these uni cricketers were running at 7 o'clock in the morning after a night out. And you're like, gosh, I feel like I'm maybe being a bit too much here. But then it led on to them keeping that going, and which is awesome to see. But for me, I think either way that I wanted to work in professional sport. So managed to have that opportunity to work at Cardiff City's Academy for a year, which was unbelievable. I still keep in contact with a lot of the guys that either work there or work at different clubs. Probably the point for me where I probably learned the most doing that in third year is probably a bit of a risk now, but it allowed me to put into practice all those theories that I was learning in lectures and preparing for exams. I could visualize it that way. It's almost like a reverse engineering. You're almost learning it. It's not quite there, but then you look at the outcome and you look back on how those achieved, and it definitely makes it a lot easier for me personally. So yeah, I just think, I was trying to get as much experience as I could, and I think that was just the type of way that I was that I previously mentioned.
So you mentioned having that opportunity to work at Cardiff. So how did that come about? How did you work around getting that placement? Did it just happen to come around, or did you network, or did you reach out to someone?
It's a funny story actually, which is it just came about. A friend of mine in Gibraltar, her mum was working or still works with some kind of real estate and works almost like an Airbnb system in Gibraltar. And she was having the goalkeeper coach of Cardiff City stay there. And she reached out to him without me asking and said, "Oh, my daughter's friend is a sports scientist at Cardiff. Can I get your email?" And he gave me his email and he put me in touch with the head of performance there. And then I interviewed for it and I got it. It came about quite bizarrely. I never had any plans to apply for anything related to that. In fact, that was probably my first point where I saw that difference between a sports scientist and an S&C in a certain way. There's not many differences, but that was my point where when I had that experience where I knew that S&C or being that sports scientist, that collaborative role was for me. But I think that stresses the importance of just being open to new challenges. To me, I was like, I've worked in professional sport before. So almost having that open mind to opportunities that come about, even when you're in the real world working, when you're at uni or even before uni, and almost just going to shadow someone and watch how they do things. I was very much that kind of guy when before I had any qualifications, I would, even if I could just go and watch a session, I would always be that guy when I went to football games where I would go and watch the warm up to see how they were doing it as well. So even just doing stuff like that. So yeah, that was a bit of a bizarre start, but it was probably the best decision that I've ever made to my friends. I'm definitely internally grateful because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't so.
When you mentioned about being open to opportunities, and you're open to coaching uni cricket team as well, which just shows that you get great value of coaching any athlete. Really, it doesn't have to be professionals. It can be a grassroots, it could be uni friends, it can be just a general person in the gym. You're going to get lots of value from just coaching real people.
100%. I think, and even I'm a big believer in almost that your career is like a big Swiss Army knife, and you got all those little tools that come out, and you're almost that guy who needs to have that massive Swiss Army knife, you can't fit it in your pocket. You've got so many tools to your arsenal. Throughout those times now, even going back to the personal trainer stuff, you're like, I think as S&C sometimes we get a bit defensive as well. Oh no, I'm not a personal trainer. I'm an S&C, mind yourself. But in a serious way, I worked with an 86-year-old woman when I was a personal trainer. So doing all the stuff that I do now in my coaching practice, and there's a lot of eyes on the county game, and from an S&C side, I think you better than anyone as well, mate, where you need to, not for their point of view, I think it's really good because it works on your own practice as well. So how can I relate the stuff I do with that 86-year-old woman to some of my fast bowlers now? And you're just like, Fitzy, what are you talking about? I'm like, all that control stuff and all that stability stuff that I was doing with this 86-year-old lady transfers over now to some of my bowlers, because not that they're the same physical characteristics, but some of the same little drills that I do. So I could never have done that without doing that stuff first. And working with uni cricketers, guys who are coming through the pathway on their first year on the academy or their first year as a professional cricketer, working with the professionals as well. They never had that S&C support. How can you start from the bottom whilst they're quite at a matured age? So I think you can never ever, and we mentioned all these placements, some placements I've been on, which we'll get onto, didn't go swimmingly when I either left or was asked to move on because maybe coaching styles didn't work out. That came to the end of the placement and there wasn't a job opportunity there for me. And so you learn from every single bit of experience in good ways and bad ways, and how to do stuff and how not to do stuff. So yeah, I definitely don't think you should, whatever experience you do, again, when it comes down to even watching or shadowing someone, of undervaluing how important that is in your development.
Yeah, and you mentioned that 86-year-old person, and I think as a coach, if you can convince someone to buy into your philosophy who isn't getting paid to be there or doesn't have an end goal in terms of performance, and you can convince that person to come back next week to pay you again to come and join the gym, and think that adds great value into your coaching rather than having someone who has to be there as an athlete. So rather than, if you can get that someone to buy into your philosophy who wants to come back next week, that'll add a lot towards your coaching in sport.
Yeah, for sure. I think an example that I always give is you've got two ends of the spectrum, like you just mentioned, mate, where you got guys who probably being paid, or guys and girls who are being paid to be there and they're contractually obligated to do your sessions. And in cricket, it's very different to football, where you have some guys who sometimes will give you a cold shoulder and be like, yeah, good one. Yeah, I'm not doing that. And you need to work in your practices to convince them or try and work with them. I had an overseas when I first came in to Derbyshire who didn't want to do anything in the gym, and came towards the back end of the county season. He realised how intense it was and started to buy into my philosophy slowly, but it didn't mean that I rushed in to do it immediately. It just meant that I needed to be a bit different with it. But I've had the same thing when I was working as a personal trainer. You had guys or girls who didn't really want to be there on occasions, and you had to adjust the session. Are they going to get the most out of that session if you do the same one? No. So I have to fun little warm-up beforehand and almost got them going, and they almost leave the session and they almost feel that cliche rush of adrenaline or that little bit of endorphins going because they've exercised. So yeah, I think it all comes down to, like we just mentioned, mate, just like having those experiences with a plethora of different athletes almost makes you so versatile to deal with situations in real life or working in professional sport.
I'm just going to have to pause for a minute just to get my sofa.
All good, mate. All good.
I just had a text that says,
which whatsoever, mate. All good.
Oh, no, it says it's 9:09 now. These tracking things they're useless. Like they say all around the corner and then not.
The four delivery stops are there.
Yeah. We'll go on to the next question. Yeah, we'll move on to dealing with failure. So you mentioned around failing to get into Loughborough and also failing to get placed at Leicester, and how you might navigated those, because I think a lot of coaches will go through failure. So as you mentioned, not everything goes great, and you face these challenges, especially through your degree or applying for placements or even during your coaching. So you mentioned how you really want to get into Loughborough, but you failed a couple of times, and also you were aimed to get a placement at Leicester and didn't manage to get that opportunity. So how, as a young student or as an aspiring coach, did you manage failure and dealing with those challenging times where you might not be getting the opportunities that you're wanting?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, because you look at someone's LinkedIn profile and they've got all these placements there and they don't see all those no's that you've got underneath there. You can't put those on LinkedIn. For me, I've definitely dealt better with it. And you mentioned failure, but even dealing with scenarios that you do in everyday life now or working in sport nowadays, dealt much better with it than I did when I was a young S&C or coming out of uni. So definitely probably threw my toys out of the pram a couple of times and was like, why didn't I get in? I thought this was my year and I did everything I could, all this experience working at Cardiff. Why didn't I get in? I think it just comes down to perspective and understanding how you did on the day. Very to break them down. The stuff at Loughborough, being an athlete beforehand, I definitely knew that it was the pinnacle and it was going to be extremely challenging. But for me, I wasn't going to give up on trying to get in. Even if I didn't get in that third, I was lucky enough to get in to do my master's there. Even if I didn't get that opportunity, I still would have probably tried to do a second master's and probably got in. Not because it was the be all and end all, but because I knew that would have been that final tick in the box for me as an S&C where I could go to literally the best university in the world. And like I mentioned before, studying isn't everything. It's being important, yes. It's something where I think you need to almost have both sides of the toolbox. And for me, when I finally managed to get there, that sense of satisfaction from a personal point of view and from an outside perspective, where my mum and dad's have seen those journeys where I've called them down the phone, I'm crying, I'm saying, I didn't get in again, so got to keep going. I've applied to when I didn't get that Leicester placement as well. For me, when I finished at Cardiff City, I had a couple of people who were at Cardiff City at the time or had moved on, where they had gone through that same system when they'd gone from Cardiff to Loughborough and then got a placement at Leicester City. And yeah, it was extremely challenging. That was probably the first kind of no that I had got from working in professional sport. It was tough to take, but it definitely shaped me into when I finished that at Loughborough and dealing with all those applications to jobs and not getting them. I think I'll split them down into the uni stuff and then the Loughborough stuff and then the placement stuff. I think coping with the rejections and the no's are really important. You're probably going to get more no's than you are yeses. So yeah, the Loughborough stuff, I think, as I mentioned to a lot of people, I think even if I would have not been given the place at Loughborough to do my marks, I probably still would have tried a third, the fourth, or fifth, and the sixth time or whatever, until they probably broke me, to be honest. But no, for me, I think it really shaped me into dealing with the no's when it came to applying for jobs and things like that. Before I managed to get my role at Derbyshire, where, yeah, they're really tough to hear. So for me, probably when I was a bit younger and a bit more naive, I was probably threw my toys out the pram a couple of times and rung mum and dad down the phone and told them how terrible they are as people because they've not brought me on. But I think just understanding the specific day, whether it's a job interview or when it comes down to them dealing with your application, I think it's very much out of your hands and almost dealing with the controllables when you can. So for me, when it came down to both times I was rejected at Loughborough, it's probably a case of I probably wasn't just quite there yet. But then when it came down to the placement stuff at Leicester, that was probably the harder bit, where I hadn't worked in professional sport for apart from that placement at Cardiff City. I hadn't really experienced what a no was yet. So I think dealing with that was awesome. And it probably made me a bit more determined, if I'm honest. So for me, it shaped who I am massively. When you do get a no, don't worry about it. It's just a case of you just need to move on and maybe look outside of the box. And a couple of my placements where I've managed to get a little bit more experience, which we'll get on to, working in cricket specifically, definitely wouldn't have happened without Leicester saying no. So probably it was a bit of a blessing in disguise, and I definitely wouldn't change the journey for sure. And like I just mentioned beforehand, even the ones that you do get a yes to and they don't quite work out, they're probably equally as hard to take as the no's. But I think just taking each experience at a time and learning from it, and then when you do get your first job, you can look back on it and then be able to deal with things a little bit better. I think sometimes as well, when people get their first job straight away, they almost have a bit of uncertainty as to how to deal with things. But I definitely think I'm able to cope with things better today because of all those stuff, for sure.
And now you're on the flip side, you're actually within professional sport and you're an established coach, but also reflecting back on your time as a student. Have you got any advice for those coaches who are once again into professional sport, who are reaching out to coaches and maybe offering their services, say they'll come work for free, or will we come and let me shadow? Have you got any advice for those coaches now, having seen it on the other side where you're probably receiving messages from students in terms of the best way of approach to reaching out to those sort of people?
Yeah, just keep doing it. Keep doing it, because ultimately I think it's really underrated. I think some coaches who are working in professional sport absolutely hate it. And there's definitely a time and place where, there's some tough times where you might get a few and you might have to say no to multiple people. It's hard. But I think there's definitely a lot of times now where, even with some of my experiences, where it came about through messaging people on LinkedIn. So definitely it's just one of those awkward things that you need to get over. But if you can, get that bravery to do it, I think it's really valuable, because like I mentioned before, you're going to get more no's than you are yeses. But if out of 100, that one person says yes, it could shape your career. So don't be hesitant to do it. Ultimately, you would probably regret it more if you didn't do it than if you tried and they said no. So definitely try and reach out to people. And even if it's advice, I had one person the other day who sent me a message on LinkedIn and wanted to come into the club and to do all these things. And, actually loved I loved the kind of openness and wanting to do stuff. There's got to be a right time and a procedure to do some things nowadays. But I definitely admire his courage for doing so, because if we would have been in a different scenario where we might have needed an extra placement student, 100%, I think every coach, when they get into professional sport and they've been to some of these things, I feel, and other coaches might not agree, I feel like I've got a bit of a duty now to almost be that person to lean on, even if it's a question. If someone has a question on LinkedIn or my S&C Instagram, it's something where I'd feel obligated to help them, even if it might take me a few days to get back to it, so it'll be a rotation, but I'll definitely do my best to, even if it's just answering a question that they've got or giving them a bit of advice, or I've not quite had maybe that opportunity to give them some placement experience or answer their question, but to point them in the right direction to people that building up a really good network for me was something that I wanted to do, and it's something that I'm grateful to have done. But for me, just give you a bit of context, our lead at Derbyshire, I messaged him before the role even came out, so he was an experience, and it didn't quite work out because they had some students at the time and it wasn't going to work out. But when it came down to the job interview, I had already spoken to him, so he almost knew a little bit about me because I had reached out to him and I had talked to him and jumped on the phone with him, and it definitely felt really comfortable when it came to that interview. So I'm not saying that I should go and message 100 coaches, but what I mean is that there's something that you really want to go into, and there's a bit of a niche there, what you want to go into, which was for me, professional cricket. Definitely reach out to those that are doing it. Like I said, you might get some no responses, you might get some people who just can't help you, or if you do want to reach out to them, I recommend 100% you do. Probably get some stick for saying that, but definitely reach out to people. And it doesn't always have to be a question about as an opportunity, but just a question about coaching, and that might lead on to something later on down the line.
And every strength conditioning coach loves a coffee as well, so it doesn't have to be even
Definitely.
in an environment. Even if I'm going to meet for a coffee at something that I'm sure that's probably more convincing than
Definitely.
So now you managed to get into these placements, so some cool ones at Cardiff and at Warwickshire Cricket and at Cambridge and Birmingham. So now you're starting to get into those placements. How did you navigate around, firstly, building your knowledge and confidence, and then start to develop as a coach in either that shadowing or actually taking sessions?
Yeah, I think it was more so the latter. I think I knew that I was going to gain confidence by coaching. And like I said, I was literally talking about someone about this the other day. I think sometimes people nowadays, when they get onto placement, are a bit thrown into shadowing and watching how it's done, or some duties which are little things like supplements and stuff like that. But I always, with our placement students now at Derbyshire, I always give them an age group to focus on and learn from them. So like throwing them into the deep end straight away and coaching. Make mistakes, learn from them, ask questions, try new things, and don't worry, it's not off the backing of those age group suffering, but I'm always there to kind of not look over, but like definitely there to almost mentor in a way, and for sure. So I was very much similar. So dealing with those points where you might feel a bit nervous to lead that warm up, just throw yourself in there. And if it goes wrong, at least you know what not to do next time. And there's going to be other opportunities. So don't feel that if something goes wrong, that you're not going to get that opportunity again. But even if it was, like I said, a warm up there, a testing day, for example, is really good because, especially I think you know it best, where any extra hands-on testing day is really useful. So yeah, you're learning from different tests. In the tests I do today, I've put them into practice multiple times at various different placements before I've actually done them. We've had some students from Derby Uni who aren't on placement at Derbyshire come in to help, things like that. And don't get me wrong, it's daunting. And you're like, oh yeah, it's tough to even ask the question, let alone to actually do it. I think it just comes down to that initial first yes, so that opening that first question that we just mentioned. And yeah, it was challenging on certain occasions where you might just be like, oh, not today, Fitzy, or we'll look at doing it again maybe next time. But for me, I learned a lot from those little clients where I did get the opportunity to lead that warm up at Cardiff City, from working with the 16s with my maximum kind of point, then I did a little bit of work with the 18s and then the under 23s at the time, which is now under 21s, and working with the professional footballers then. And cool, just a little bit different now. And you're like, but then it almost comes down to doing the similar things that you would do. I know it told me a warm up, and you're like, all you're doing is leading a warm up. That's really simple. But at the time, that was the biggest challenge in the world for me as a placement student. Yeah, definitely just ask the question, throw yourself into the deep end and just deal with it in the actual session itself or the testing day, and you'll learn from it for sure in both a good or a bad way, and you can learn from it and progress on to the next one.
And from what I've realized is that the likelihood is that the players won't even realize you made a mistake if you gave a wrong coaching cue in a drill, or you designed a drill in a certain way that you might have done differently next time. The likelihood the players aren't even going to realize. But let's say if you're leading a warm up and you make a mistake in one of your drills or your games, and you can then start to have a bit of a laugh with that group, and it brings you into part of that group as well. If you're having if you make a mistake, and you can own it in front of them as well.
100%. Yeah. I think that one of the things which make me laugh today is, and Matt, one of my kind of people that I've looked up to and I still do, is Phil Scott from England Cricket. Him being the men's lead for a long time, I looked up to him, and like I said, I still do, into the bits that he does. When we go to conferences, I'm always asking questions, trying to ring him on the phone to chat to him about different things. And he once said that he's done warm-ups with the men's team, and they've actually told him that was match that was. And I've had those experiences as well when I went to lead the first team for the first time at Derbyshire. There's definitely some warm-ups, and then they're like, Fitzy, this is rubbish, this. And I was like, I felt like all this pressure on me. I had the head of cricket watching me. I had the batting coach, the bowling coach, the head jersey, I had a medical. Oh, God, it was really bad then. But it just came down to learning from it and adapting it, and almost coming up with different ways that different athletes like different things. And it's about being adaptable at those different times. And again, learning from it. And I'm learning every day, just because I've got a nice job title on my LinkedIn profile or next to my name doesn't mean that my journey's done. So learning from different things every day. There's still some programming that I've done, which I look back and I'm like, gosh, that was awful. How did I let myself do that? Or you go on to different things and you plan it and you look at it the next day and you're like, that's terrible. Let me redo that. Yeah, which I think just learning from it every day and almost having those little check-ins with yourself and other people as well. I'm no person to even if it's from a programming perspective, I'll send it to someone and be like, what do you reckon of this? What do you reckon of this exercise? How can we put that in a different way? So yeah, don't be closed off for sure, because you definitely learn from it and better yourself.
So were there any other ways that you found that developing as a coach works well for you, whether that was filming yourself and rewatching it back or sending it to someone? Did you have a mentor? You mentioned there just about send some programs off for some feedback as well. So do you have any other ways that really helps you developing as a coach?
I think the majority of my development came from actually coaching, like I previously mentioned. Like, worked at Cardiff City. I was expecting to work with a full-time member of staff and to get experiences, but they said, no, you're going to deal with the 11s and 12s. You're going to deal with the 13s and 14s. You're going to deal with 16s and 18s, and then you're going to deal with the 21s. And I was like, what about, who's the member of staff? Oh, no, just you. And I was like, oh my words. So throw it into the deep end, proper. So
I agree. And I think that's the hardest age group to coach. There's 11, 12-year-olds who are running around.
For sure. Those guys haven't had any SNC before. for me, it was really challenging, but every single session, I almost felt that confidence coming to being able to try new things. I tried a lot of things that didn't work, tried a lot of things that worked. But I think, again, it comes down to why we do what we do at Derbyshire at the minute with our placement students, where we give them that opportunity to coach and just to coach. Yes, you'll have your times where you got to shadow, and yeah, you have your times where you do some help out with setting up bits of kit and stuff like that, which you're like, oh, this is not helping at all. But it definitely comes down, then helps you when it comes to your bits where you lead yourself. Speak to people, whether it's listening to podcasts like this one or listening to podcasts from other SNCs, from other sports, is one thing that I found really useful. I mentioned Trill Scott, even James Bell, who's the lead at the minute, Ali McKenzie was the head of medical, Lucia Raza was our assistant. I can't express how much I've learned from all those three lads from 2 years of being at the club. I've learned a hell of a lot from them, from Belly a lot, from being in that role and having that vision to be at some point from definitely ready for that next step. And it wouldn't be because of him, because I definitely wouldn't be ready if it wasn't for him, because the little things that you deal with from working in sport, if you have that guy above you who can almost mentor you from above, you almost feel that sense of, right, cool, he's been there before, he's done it. Like, how can you learn from me? It might be the stupidest question in the world. It might be the stupid stuff like, wait, what music do the guys listen to in the gym? Or what warm-up did you do which they really liked? Or what supplements did you give them then which helped out? So asking those questions of those guys as well. So yeah, definitely speak to people and build those relationships. I think some people are really quick to judge people as well. And sometimes you might not get along with everyone. That's one thing I've learned as well. And it's definitely impacted me before. It's almost trying to please everyone all at the same time. Even if it's someone that you don't quite get along with, if you can, from a professional level, just chat about the development of a player, even just push aside your differences and work with that player. I've had that before in previous experiences, and I'm lucky that I don't have that now. But previously, it's been a real challenge with some members of staff. And it's almost need to find that fine line between put your personal stuff aside and let's focus on this player. How can we make him better? Yeah, I think just chatting to people. Yeah, it's the best one for me.
And I heard a good quote from another coach last week, and they said, never be the smartest person in the room. So always have someone there to learn off. And if you are the smartest person in the room, find someone else who you can learn off, which is quite an interesting quote I heard.
That's an amazing one. I think another one which I've heard of, which resonated with me loads from my last experience to get my first job, was that you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So listen more than you talk. That's one thing for me which has been massive, because from getting that first role, I almost felt that I almost tried to do too much stuff too soon. And I didn't listen when I first got in and listen to the guys that were already in that environment. It was a tough job when I first came in, but I felt listening to the advice that I had, or maybe not asking for that advice and listening, was something that I maybe could have done better. But like I said, that's why we learn and we adapt from it. When it came down to my performance review and I listened to that and didn't even say a word, I just focused on listening and learning from it. And it's definitely shaped me into that better coach. So that's another one that I've heard, which was spot on.
Let's round up in terms of back full circle now. So you managed to get a job, obviously, at Derbyshire Cricket. So how did that come around? You mentioned a little bit earlier around reaching out to James Bell, who's SSC coach there at the time. But yeah, how did you navigate in terms of interviewing or applying and interviewing and then getting that job?
I think it was a case of just applying for it. It wasn't just a case because I'd spoken to Belly before, but it was cricket. I wanted to work in cricket. I was actually still finishing my masters at the time, which is one thing that I forgot to mention. I got the job when I was about probably 2/3 of the way, and traveling around with the first student doing the one-day cup and finishing my dis off. It was an absolute nightmare. Guys are going up, didn't I was like, no, I'm going to finish your dissertation off. But yeah, it just came down to applying for it. I'd unfortunately had a few, like I mentioned, I probably had about 46 or 47 applications, which either were a no or ignored before I got even an interview or a yes. And that's one thing that I need to mention. Just because you don't get a response back, or you hear a no, or you get an interview and then you hear a no, it doesn't quite shape who you are. There might have just been a better person for the role. I applied to, in that same sequence, applied to a job at Stoke City, got an interview, didn't quite get it. Felt like I'd done all the preparation in the world. Turns out the guy who got the job was a head of academy sport science at a Premier League club. You're like, how can you compete with that, right? But so not being knocked back, because there's always not being knocked back by that is really important. So I just kept applying for jobs, and that one at Derbyshire came up, and I felt in a really good spot. I didn't feel in particular that, went really well. I didn't want to get it, but I was just myself, and I was probably guilty of trying to be someone that I wasn't when I was applying to certain jobs, where I probably tried to sound really smart and say something which maybe just wasn't within my job role, and that probably hindered me. And I can't give you an example from that I recall, but just trying to be yourself in that role. And I think it was a natural kind of suit for me, and definitely a reason why I'm still here today.
And then you mentioned a little bit around, to finish off around you being thrown into the deep end. You mentioned you had to go straight in with the first team as well, which one expected alongside your dissertation. And then you were expecting maybe to be an assistant who was either supporting or looking after the academies. And I'm sure all those experiences before where you've been thrown into the deep end on your placements really shaped you towards that experience there.
Yeah, I think when that opportunity was given to me, I was extremely excited, but probably didn't take the time to realize what a big job that was. And let me be honest, it didn't go the best. So for me, it was a tough start. It was a really tough start, and there was definitely second thoughts about, oh, am I in the right job? Am I in the right role? And again, credit comes down to the three lads that I mentioned before, where they were there to support and just be like, nobody's perfect. You got to learn from it. And when I then did that same cover role in the 2024 One Day Cup, I made sure that was spot on. And yeah, I definitely learned from that experience, and is a reason why I think today I'm ready for that first team role whenever it comes about, because I've learned from it and I've been there and I've done it. Not that I think that's the reason why, but I think also that I think you get into certain environments and people get promoted to certain roles, but they've done before, and it's almost that bigger step, and they feel that's why they leave the sport. I've had that before with friends of mine who have been promoted to higher job, whether it's in football or rugby, and they've ended up leaving because it's too much. I just feel that having done that role before for an extended period of time whilst Belly was away, I was able to almost settle into that environment and do that job and feel confident that I've done it before. So yeah, definitely shaped who I am today for sure, even though at the time it was the scariest thing in the world.
No, I think just over this chat, I've learned a lot, and I've really been fascinated in terms of how you manage those difficult times, because like you mentioned on people's LinkedIn profiles or people's CVs, you don't see the no's and you don't see the hard times there that every coach will go through. So I'm sure for a lot of coaches who are listening, it's quite nice to listen and resonate with a lot of challenges that everyone's facing out there.
Yeah, and I've been fascinated by going through it myself, because there's definitely points, even when you've got the job, where you look back and like I mentioned before, that was really naff. Like, why did I do that? Or why was I thinking like that at the time? And I think it's really important to listen to chats like this one or from other podcasts as well, because I think there will be a change at some point where placements and internships, whatever you want to call them, they'll either fade out and people will get really junior roles, or they'll become really important, and things like masters and things like that might become a bit less important. I'm not saying that education is not important, but I think there's almost two ways that it can go. So I think just throwing yourself into deep end in both ways, and mentioning there's going to be stuff that you have to do. So if you're like myself and you weren't quite book smart and you needed to get that placement experience, understand that you needed to do that master's to almost get that educational side and have that underlying knowledge. And then the placement stuff, there's a 1-2, and yes, it is a have to, but that's what I really wanted to do. I need to do this before I need to do this. So understand that you need a little bit of balance between both. And yeah, just being as brave as you can and looking for what you want and go and get it, because no one's going to get it for you. So you need to go out and want to do it first.
So if there are any coaches out there who want to reach out to you, maybe just for advice or anything that we spoke around today, is there any way people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, don't be shy. I'll definitely try and get back to you when I can. It's just James Fitzgerald on LinkedIn, or I've got a strength and conditioning page on Instagram, which is James Fitz SNC, I think it is. So yeah, please do reach out, and if I can't help in any way, I'll definitely do my best to. Sure.
No, I appreciate it. And thank you, James, for being really honest here around your S&C
No
journey.
worries.
It's been great to listen, and we'll look forward to hearing a bit more about you as well going forward.
No worries. Thanks for having me on, mate.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Athletic Skills Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it helpful in learning more about impacting your youth athletes' movement and physical development. If you did enjoy this episode, please take a moment to give us a subscribe and share to any other coaches or teachers that you think it may help. Also, if you have any feedback or topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or on the email in the description, and we'll be more than happy to try and tackle those challenges you are facing as a sports coach or a PE teacher. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. I look forward to speaking to you soon.